Tonight, 5 U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq, gunned down by a U.S. Army sergeant. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan is removed.
There are large areas in Afghanistan where we are not winning.
More of my recent interview with General David McKiernan and a look at the new American strategy. Healthcare reform gets a major shot in the arm. The health industry says this time it's on board. And that commuter plane crash near Buffalo, troubling new details and questions about the training record of the pilot.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. After more than 7 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's easy to become numb to the mounting U.S. death toll. And then something so terrible happens, it simply stuns us. And that's what happened today when word came that 5 American soldiers were killed in Iraq, not by the enemy, but by another U.S. soldier. National Security Correspondent David Martin has the story.
It happened at Camp Liberty near the Baghdad airport. An American soldier walked into a combat stress center, a place where military men and women can go to seek help, and opened fire, killing 5 of his fellow soldiers before he was subdued. It's not the first case in this war of a soldier turning his weapon on his own, but it is the worst.
Such a tragic loss of life at the hands of our own forces is a cause for great and urgent concern.
The stress center had been set up for the express purpose of dealing with the explosion of mental problems caused by the repeated deployments and close quarters combat of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to initial reports, the shooter, an Army sergeant, had gone there looking for help, got into an argument, left in such an agitated state that his weapon was taken away from him, but managed to get another one, came back, and gunned down the workers at the center.
It does speak to me, though, about the need for us to redouble our efforts, the concern in terms of dealing with the stress.
According to the most recent figures, 300,000 servicemen and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan have reported a mental health problem. This email, sent last year from Afghanistan, captures the strain of too much mission for too few soldiers. We are so short now over here that we are starting to see signs of some folks really stressing out. And in the end, it's all due to our personnel shortages.
As long as the demand on forces stays what it is right now, and the supply of forces remains the same, it'll be very difficult for us to do anything with that stress. But we've got to help soldiers understand how they can cope with that stress.
Army Vice Chief of Staff Pete Corelli has been grappling with one of the most extreme consequences of stress, a suicide rate which began this year at record levels, 23 in the month of January, but has now come down to 7 known or suspected cases in April. This was not suicide, of course, but murder. We don't know the motive of the Army sergeant who pulled the trigger, but it seems safe to say that both he and the 5 mental health workers who were supposed to help him were all victims of combat stress. Katie?
David Martin. David, thank you very much. Now turning to the war in Afghanistan and a major shakeup in the U.S. military command there. Defense Secretary Robert Gates said today he wants a new leader to carry out the president's new strategy. So he fired the top commander.
Do some quick introductions.
It's the first time a commander in the middle of a war has been removed from his position since General Douglas MacArthur in 1951. Apparently, there has been pressure for months to replace General David McKiernan by some military experts who felt his expertise in waging a counterinsurgency was inadequate.
It simply was my conviction, based on my consultations with Admiral Mullen and General Petraeus, that a fresh approach, a fresh look in the context of the new strategy probably was in our best interest.
That fresh look will come from General Stanley McChrystal, a former Green Beret in charge of the mission that tracked and killed top al-Qaeda operative Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and General David Rodriguez, who will be responsible for the day-to-day operations in Afghanistan. McKiernan began his long military career with the Army in 1972 and served in the Balkans, the first Gulf War, and led U.S. and coalition troops in removing Saddam Hussein from power as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. For the past 11 months in Afghanistan, McKiernan has been in charge of overseeing 32,000 international troops, as well as the U.S. forces there, which will grow to 68,000 by the end of the summer after the additional 21,000 so-called surge troops arrive. It turns out telling McKiernan face-to-face he was being relieved of his duties was the primary reason Secretary Gates traveled to Afghanistan last week. Sources close to the defense secretary say McKiernan showed extraordinary class when he heard the news and did this interview shortly thereafter. He gave no indication his time in this troubled country might be coming to a close and expressed optimism about the mission.
Every day that I'm here in Afghanistan, I understand the people of this country a little better, and they are very, very big-hearted people that want peace, and they are friends of the United States of America. And so I don't lose hope.
That exclusive interview with General McKiernan conducted when I was in Kabul last week was his last as commander in Afghanistan. Now, he has consistently pressed for additional troops, but leaves just as the surge is getting underway. Those additional troops, part of a fresh approach to getting Afghanistan under control. This is what America's new Afghan strategy looks like up close. Rather than staying on large bases, U.S. and international forces are fanning out into the country, setting up smaller operations in local communities, working with Afghan security forces, and getting to know the people they're trying to protect. On a mountaintop in Afghanistan's rugged Logar province, soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division are watching over U.S. convoys as they bring supplies to one of these new outposts. The Taliban are fighting back. Bombings and ambushes are a daily occurrence here.
They kind of observe what you do as you come in, and they always like to shoot as you're leaving.
Logar province lies just south of Kabul, and the Taliban are fighting hard to hold on to it so they can use it to launch attacks on the capital. This is just one of several regions that are very much in play.
There are large areas in Afghanistan where we are not winning. There are areas that I've said where it's stalemated, that we don't necessarily control, the Taliban doesn't necessarily control, but there's a feeling of insecurity.
But the harsh reality is this: there are simply not enough boots on the ground to reach every corner of this vast, rugged country. Even with the additional troops coming in, it's impossible for them to be everywhere they need to be. But the U.S. military is beginning to make some inroads. As the Americans build these new small bases in the countryside, they're also hiring Afghan workers, and there are plans to introduce a community-based security force. It's already been done in Wardak province next door, and so far it's popular with the tribal leaders.
We brought up their village elders to the graduation. They were ecstatic. They were proud that their sons were now in a uniform. They were paid. They had some equipment, and they were going to come back to their village and provide local security, guard the roads, guard the mosque, guard the school.
But even as he outlined the new strategy, General McKiernan made it clear he wasn't convinced there were enough troops to pull it off. We've heard stories from U.S. soldiers who have moved into areas in the mountains in Logar province, and they've been told they are the first Americans to set foot in that village. And that is 8 years into this war. Do we have enough troops, General, to actually place soldiers in some of these remote areas?
No, we don't have enough troops of any country, to include Afghanistan, to have a persistent security presence everywhere in Afghanistan. And that's why we need more military capability.
Incidentally, McKiernan is expected to retire after 37 years in the military. Meanwhile, McChrystal needs Senate confirmation before he can take over, and that could happen by the end of next month. Here on the home front, one of President Obama's biggest challenges is health care reform, and it looks like he will have an ally President Clinton did not when his plan failed. The healthcare industry. It pledged today to cut the growth in healthcare costs by 1.5 percentage points a year for 10 years for a savings of $2 trillion. Bill Plant tells us the major players were all at the White House today.
The president, flanked by former opponents of healthcare reform, called the industry's promise remarkable.
What's brought us all together today is a recognition that we can't continue down the same dangerous road we've been traveling for so many years.
The same groups representing doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical makers, and insurers who met the president today
This healthcare security card
bitterly and successfully opposed President Clinton's health care reform plan in 1993 with a classic TV ad campaign.
Having choices we don't like is no choice at all.
They choose.
We lose.
But now, said the president, with costs out of control, the one-time opponents have changed their minds.
It's a recognition that the fictional television couple Harry and Louise, who became the iconic faces of those who opposed health care reform in the 90s, desperately need health care reform in 2009.
The health care providers, joined by the Service Employees Union, made broad promises to simplify health care administration, deliver health care more efficiently, reduce hospitalization, which they say will save $2 trillion over 10 years and save the average family $2,500 a year. But the pledges are vague, with no guarantee they'll be carried out. Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius expects specifics in a few weeks.
They volunteered this. They clearly think it's achievable, and they're very committed to making good on those promises.
Healthcare reform advocates say the providers are cooperating because they have to.
If they want to shape and play some role in shaping the health reform legislation, they've got to have a cooperative posture. They have really a choice.
The providers hope to block price controls and also any kind of public insurance plan. They also want to mandate that everyone has to be insured. So to have any voice in this debate, they have to have a seat at the table. Katie?
Bill Plant at the White House tonight. Bill, thank you. The president's budget director says the cost of health care is the biggest reason for the rising deficit. The White House today raised the projected red ink for this year to more than $1.8 trillion. That's 4 times more than last year's deficit. And it means 46 cents out of every dollar spent this year will be borrowed money. And President Obama is ready to spend billions to fix America's worst schools. In plans announced today, 5,000 failing schools would close over the next 5 years and reopen with new principals and new teachers. The president expects to spend $5 billion on the program. That's about $1 million per school. And one more note about your money tonight. There are 2 ways to look at it. One is, as of today, you can send a letter anywhere in America for just 44 cents. The other is that's 2 cents more than it cost yesterday. Since 1974, when a first-class stamp cost 10 cents, the price has been rising, an average of a penny a year. Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, that deadly commuter plane crash near Buffalo. Did the pilot have the proper training? It's a risky and complicated mission. The shuttle Atlantis is on its way to the Hubble Space Telescope after a picture-perfect launch today. 5 grueling spacewalks are planned to overhaul the 19-year-old telescope. By the way, because Hubble's orbit is so high, Atlantis wouldn't be able to reach the space station in an emergency. So, in an unprecedented move, NASA has the shuttle Endeavour standing by on a launch pad for a possible rescue mission. Turning now to the investigation of that deadly commuter plane crash near Buffalo back in February, the National Transportation Safety Board opens a hearing on it tomorrow. And today, Nancy Cordes tells us serious questions were raised about the pilot and the training he received.
It was the worst crash the country has seen in 7 years, killing 50. Now, Colgan Air confirms the captain on that frigid Buffalo night, 47-year-old Marvin Renslow, had racked up 5 unsatisfactory test flights called check rides, 2 during his brief 3-year tenure at the airline and 3 in the years before that. Renslow had just 2 months' experience on the Q400 turboprop. His co-pilot, Rebecca Shaw, was 24 years old.
It looks like we have 2 inexperienced crew members in the cockpit. And we learned a long time ago that that's not a very good idea.
The plane was on final approach to Buffalo when the stick shaker activated, alerting pilots that they were going too slow and about to stall. As the stick automatically pushed forward in order to dive the plane and pick up airspeed, the captain pulled up. Exactly the opposite of what pilots are trained to do. Colgan Air acknowledged today Renslow never trained on the stall warning system in a simulator. only in the classroom.
The stick shaker training is, in my view, is very, very important. And to just read it out of a book and just talk about it is not very good training.
This accident didn't have to happen.
Scott Moorer lost his 30-year-old daughter, Lauren, an athletic manager at Princeton University. He's come to Washington with her boyfriend, hoping to get some answers about the crash at this week's NTSB hearings.
Things that you're hearing, they certainly don't give you a warm and fuzzy feeling about, the day-to-day operations of some of these, small commuter airlines.
Colgan Air points out its pilot training regimen was examined and approved by the FAA. NTSB sources say the FAA's standards will be a prime focus at the hearings. Katie?
Nancy Cordes, thanks very much. Turning overseas, Roxana Saberi, the American journalist accused of spying in Iran, is free tonight after 3 months in prison. An Iranian appeals court reduced her sentence, then ordered her release. Saberi's father, who was born in Iran, says they'll soon return to the United States. U.S. officials called the charges against her bogus and demanded she be released. Coming up next, unsold homes and people who can't afford one. 2 problems, 1 ingenious solution. The economic crisis has left a lot of people in this country unable to afford a home, and at the same time, a lot of homes are vacant. Well, all that gave someone a bright idea. Bill Whitaker continues our series, Bright Spots.
Ever see something so logical you say, why didn't I think of that? When real estate agent Kathy Cardenas saw so many vacant houses for sale or in foreclosure and so many people unable to afford a house in these hard times, she thought, why not put them together?
It works out for everyone. It's a win-win for everybody.
She started Designer Home Tending, now in 7 cities with some of the worst foreclosure rates. She screens people down on their luck, under or unemployed, and places them in houses for sale by owners who've had to relocate. In Salt Lake City, Autumn Marler and her family now reside in a 4,000 square foot house they couldn't afford otherwise.
My husband lost his job recently and we lost our home for a foreclosure. And basically I pay a very small amount of rent to live in a nice house and to furnish it with my things.
Cardenas says in today's cluttered market, empty houses just aren't selling well. That lived-in look, a competitive advantage.
It smells good, it feels good, it looks lived in. People like that lived in feel.
Julie Anton and her husband Robert's home in the Hollywood Hills sat empty for more than a year after they moved to St. Louis. Last month they dropped the price and turned to home tenders.
When it's got furniture in it, even if it's not their furniture, it just looks so much warmer, so much better. It just makes them think, oh, I could live here.
The service is absolutely free to home sellers. Home tenders pay a nominal fee from $500 to $1,000 per month, depending on the city, plus utilities. Now, they have to be tidy and prepared to move if the house sells.
3 bedrooms, 3 bath. So
struggling actor Mills Allison used to live in this suburban apartment building. Now, thanks to home tending, he's in Anton's $1 million house in the Hollywood Hills.
It is definitely a win for me. Yep.
In 2 years, Cardenas has gone from startup to more than 500 clients. Doing good, she's found, is good business. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Bright Spots is sponsored by Miracle Grow Liquifeed. Feeding is as easy as watering.
Finally tonight, Pope Benedict is in Israel, his first trip to the Holy Land since he became Pope 4 years ago. He flew from Amman, Jordan to Tel Aviv today. Later this week, he visits Bethlehem and Nazareth, where Jesus lived. And today at Israel's National Holocaust Memorial, Benedict faced the World War II legacy of his native Germany. From Jerusalem, here's Richard Roth.
He isn't the first pope to stand in Israel sharing the sadness rooted in the history of the Jewish state. He's not the first pope to honor the dead at Yad Vashem, but being German-born and once a conscript in Hitler's army added meaning as Benedict crossed the stone floor etched with names of Nazi death camps, and laid a wreath in memory of 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust.
They lost their lives, but they will never lose their names.
In the Krakow ghetto, this pope named Joseph Ratzinger then met 6 survivors.
Ruth Bondi was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia,
and listened
transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau,
as a list of suffering was read,
where he witnessed the murder of members of his family.
of some of Hitler's victims.
Ruth Burns perished in the Holocaust.
May their names never perish, he said. May their suffering never be denied. The Pope did not apologize for what his church did or failed to do during one of history's darkest episodes. That left some here disappointed. Yad Vashem's chairman said he heard no compassion from the Pope.
I believe that he was very moved by the entire event. I think he was moved by the visit and moved definitely by the recalling of the death of all these innocent people in the Holocaust.
There's a burden in this place that Israelis say visitors inevitably feel. For Benedict, some said you could see it weighing on his shoulders, as eloquent as any words. Richard Roth, CBS News, Jerusalem.
And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric in New York. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.